Well, Scott, thanks for joining us here at the MedTech conference.
Well, it's good to be back and good to see you outside of Florida.
I know it's Southern Cal here. You've got some friends and family stomping ground here, right?
I do. I'm a New Englander, but everyone's moved to the West Coast but myself. So spent a little time up north of here yesterday and dealt with the LA traffic getting down here this morning.
That's something I enjoy. Well, you and I always chat about a real dynamic sort of factor taking place right now in MedTech in particular.
Yeah.
Is the emergence of the ambulatory surgical center model and how we tend to see some things coming, not that they don't, but making a U-turn with the Queen Mary if you're a big MedTech company is a little difficult.
Yeah.
So if you wouldn't mind, what are you watching right now in the ASC world? What's happened over the last 24 months and what do you see coming down range?
It's a great question. I think the ambulatory surgery space has somewhat always been overlooked by a lot of big MedTech companies for a variety of reasons. It was a different call point, it had different ownership structures, and it had a financially driven buyer, meaning that clinical algorithm and benefits is absolutely important, but so is what is this product, equipment, service going to do to my bottom line and my profit share. And I think what you're seeing now is the industry is waking up to this. I always look at Stryker and what they've done. Stryker saw the move by CMS with total joints being covered with new CPT codes to ambulatory centers long before everyone else did and started preparing for it. So as you see new ambulatory centers being built, they're being built outfitted entirely with Stryker equipment because they anticipated this move, they put resources towards it, and they really offer a advisory service to those physicians, hospitals, even PE firms that are looking to pursue ambulatory strategies. To your question about what's coming down the pike, it's somewhat of a perfect storm right now of the convergence of healthcare labor costs getting out of control, a 7+% increase in wage inflation that's outpacing overall inflation, coupled with the cost of capital, which no one really is talking about right now. The PE guys are very, very attuned to what's happened with the cost of capital. And I always tell clients, it's like the mortgage market right now. All of us that were in the housing market 2-3 years ago were securing loans at 2%. You're trying to secure a new mortgage right now, you're close to 8%. It's humbling on what you can afford. Ambulatory surgery centers that have financed their de novo growth or have PE sponsors or maybe have a hospital joint venture are also going to the capital markets to finance that. So their cost of capital has gone up. And we're not quite seeing that yet because it's just been a recent move by the banks to increase the cost of capital. I think we will start to see this, and I think that's going to change commercial strategies for ambulatory centers in the next 24 months.
You bring up the commercial strategies, and I agree with you there. And you also have 3 different categories of buyers in ASCs, right? So you've got the hospital, the institution, and then you have PE, who are the masters at identifying the top 10 expenditures and then rubbing the pennies out of the nickels there. And then you've got the sort of surgeon owners at, not quite a majority share, but are also influencing and now spending their money. And now you put the cost of money at 8-9%. And when we started bringing these ASCs out of the ground 2 years ago, we didn't have these high interest rates.
No.
So now you're downrange, you've got to ride this wave. Now, if I'm outfitting an ASC, what am I doing? I'm buying CapEx. What does that do to the equation?
Your margins are being impacted dramatically. And if your cost of capital has gone up, has doubled, if not more so, you're thinking differently about the equipment that you're selecting to use in your ambulatory center. Our payer rates in the CPT code reimbursement is not going up to correspond to both the cost of capital, but also the cost of labor. So you are continually refining your operating model and your financial projections to either do more, meaning doing more procedures, which is not a sustainable strategy, but you do have physician owners who do think that way, or selecting certain types of procedures as well as certain types of equipment and implants and devices to use that will be more in line with your labor costs and their cost of capital.
So as you converge on this, you've got the higher cost of capital, you've got the labor charges going up, you even have a labor deficit that you and I are constantly exploring. You can't even get the talent sometimes in order to do the procedures. And so what is that going to force the OEMs to do on how they go to market? Historically, it's been a CapEx expenditure, but it looks like it's going to a per-click or a SaaS model now.
Yeah, I think you're going to see more SaaS models that are emerging, pay-for-procedure type models that are emerging. I also am really hopeful that as you have large private equity-owned MSOs in orthopedic or in gastroenterology, when they are doing repeat work, whether it's a total knee replacement that has some variable cost, but for the most part it's somewhat fixed. And screening colonoscopy is a great example. Probably the best example is the OEMs looking at how do you create a bundle, meaning that if I'm Stryker, how do I create a bundle for a total joint? If I'm Boston Scientific or Olympus, how do I create a bundle that's all-encompassing, regardless of what scope I use, what device I use, and how it's cleaned and reprocessed? I'm paying a set fee. And that's somewhat the holy grail that has been talked about by a lot of the OEMs, and I think this convergence of what we just talked about will force the hand of OEMs to start to think and model this out and have some risk. The physician groups are now taking risk with payers. It's time the OEMs also think about taking on risk.
Yeah, well, the only way I think in healthcare that we're going to have a sustainable, successful future is that shared risk, right? There's got to be a reciprocity in the relationship here versus a drop off the tray and I'm done. I got my Benjamin, I'm out the door, it's on you now.
Yeah.
So I think United Healthcare came out last week and said by 2030, 55% of our lives are going to be put through ASCs.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a trend. I think that's a destination.
No, I think it very much is a destination, and there was a recent Becker's article talking about the projected growth over the next 10 years. Right now, the ASC market in the US is about a $100 billion market. In the next 10 years, it will double, close to a $200 billion market. And that's obviously driven by our aging population, but that's driven by taking traditional hospital-based procedures and moving them to the ambulatory center. And I think we will see a lot more of that in the coming years.
Do you ever worry about, since now those are owned by PE, and PE is in the business of making money, and surgeons are in the business of making sure they can pay their bills because there'll be a direct correlation for how many procedures I can push through and what my margins are in the back end when they're in the hospital, there was less of a concern there. So does that ever compromise, should that procedure be done or not be done at this point in time? And who's standing guard there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know if I have a good answer for it, but I think more and more healthcare consumerism is who's going to be taking charge. The patient is going to be taking charge. And I think the more educated we all are about what we're putting in our bodies from an implant standpoint, what type of procedures and site of care that we are selecting, it will be those consumer market forces that will eventually start to have a real force in healthcare. And you're seeing it in pieces. One of the areas that I love following earnings calls. And Stryker's earnings calls are great because they focus on ambulatory surgery centers. Another earnings call that I listened to back in Q2 was Exact Sciences, Cologuard, which everyone can't watch a game without seeing Cologuard. What struck me with Cologuard, and my number might be off a little bit here, is about a quarter of their annual revenue projections right now are driven by under 45-year-olds. So what does that tell you? That tells me the consumer is selecting a at-home test versus what's a traditional form of screening colonoscopy. And I think you could probably look for more examples of that, but Exact Sciences has led not with a sales force, they've led with direct to patient. And I think we're starting to see more of this in bariatric, obviously with all the drug development that's coming, and it's going to get the attention of MedTech. I would say MedTech is slow to embrace the direct to patient side of this business, but it's very real, and I think that ultimately will be the deciding factor of what procedures should be done and where they should be done.
It's always been fascinating you bring that up, that I've been just floored that pharma certainly goes DTC all the time, but device, other than this year's football game, Super Bowl game, but here and there, they have not spent a lot of time educating the patient. And maybe it's because the margins are much different. It's tougher to understand. It's easier to take a pill than go through and understand a procedure. So finally, I want to explore one area that I think is critical, is MedTech CapEx has sold into hospitals, institutions. And those institutions are backstopped from being profitable, but also in other ways by the government. What is a risk factor at this point right now that we're selling CapEx to a private business? And how are we going to qualify, is that business going to be able to carry that cost?
The biggest risk factor, I think, right now is around the financing of that. If I'm looking at a new state-of-the-art scanner, I'm pretty darn close to about $1 million. And for an ambulatory center that maybe has 6, 7 cardiology owners or 6 or 7 orthopedic owners, they are either taking out a personal note to finance that, or looking at, with their joint venture partner, how do we finance this? That fundamentally will slow down CapEx adoption if we don't shift and pivot to more of a SaaS model. And I think it's not just a SaaS model, but it's also writing your own, some of these companies that are here, some of the big equipment companies, you know them well, have their own banking arm. And that gives them tremendous leverage in this financial market right now, the overall cost of capital. And I would encourage more MedTechs to look at really what the automobile industry did, years ago, when they have their own financing and they can offer below market financing rates to incentivize customers to buy new cars, or in this case, buy new CapEx.
Yeah, and also when you get them locked into that financing cycle, you're able to re-up a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year lease if you want to turn in your machine early or you want to upgrade it. And with the cycle of innovation, it was funny you even bring that up, is I had this conversation with somebody about the emergence of surgical robotics, that the innovation cycles are happening so rapidly right now that even buying something like that, in 3 years, you drive it off the lot, it may not be the latest. Mm-hmm. And so if you tie in the financing with that and you pull that customer in, that LTV, that lifetime value of that customer, sort of blocks out any competitor from coming in, because you can give them a preferred pricing and you can cycle them out of a technology earlier, which I think is a dynamic that will come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating time to watch what's happening with the digital innovation and its overlay into MedTech, and what's going to be driving MedTech in the future. And I just came down from the EY panel. That was a theme across every CEO, talking about, we have chips in almost all of our innovation right now. And what does that mean for the future of surgery? What does it mean for the future of implants? It's a really exciting time. I just, as a patient, I worry whether we'll have access to it. Meaning, great article in today's Wall Street Journal, which was very timely, is will the FDA keep up with the medical device innovation really around AI? And I would suggest it's not the FDA challenge right now, it's CMS and payers, that they haven't kept up with this innovation, meaning they aren't going to reimburse physicians to use it, which is going to drive what a physician selects, particularly in an ambulatory center, to use. So
That's a really good point, and FDA can stay up to it all they want, but and we've seen that with digital, is there's some great digital solutions that have sat on the sideline now for 4 or 5 years because nobody can figure out who's going to pay for it.
yeah.
Scott, I always appreciate your time and your insight, especially into the ASC world.
No, appreciate it.
You got it. You're one of the few who's come from device, startups, transactions, ASCs, and that's where the industry's going.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Joe.
I'm Joe Mullings from the MedTech conference in Anaheim. Be well.